The Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority has wasted taxpayer money for decades, and we're talking with an elected official who's had enough. Welcome to Nevada Politics Today. I'm your host, Victor Jakes. Assemblyman Keith Pickard is also running for state senate, and he joins us. Assemblyman, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I want to start with the LVCVA. Their CEO, Rossi, Ralenkotter, has announced that he is going to retire, and he's also seeking a payout upon retirement. Let's go to graphic 1 and take a look at a letter that you wrote the board on Saturday. Without exception, the constituents who contacted me vehemently opposed such a payout. And when coupled with the fact that LVCVA CEO Rossi Ralenkotter likely knew the circumstances surrounding the acquisition of the Southwest Airlines gift cards when he used them, to say nothing of the reports of lavish spending on unnecessary services and other perks, my constituents are telling me they've had enough. What response did you hope to get from that letter?
Well, really, I think it was the next paragraph. I talk about how the board really needs to do what they're going to do in the public space. Because my constituents, when I read the first article and then followed up by Mayor Lee's call for his resignation, they called me and said, this is just outrageous, particularly the part about having hired an attorney to negotiate the golden parachute. My constituents just, they couldn't stand by and be quiet about that, and I can't disagree with them. There's no statutory or contractual obligation to pay over and above what he's earned, and he's earned a fairly high pension, and he makes some good money. But at the end of the day, we're talking about somebody who is ultimately a public servant. And my constituents are saying we're done with paying for unnecessary expenses, whether or not that's at LVCVA or anywhere else.
Now, Mayor Lee has said they want to do a national search. Wouldn't it be important to show, candidates of prominence or who could really help LVCVA, look, we treat our former CEOs well? I mean, isn't this almost a recruiting tool for the next guy?
I wouldn't go there because ultimately if the investigations move forward, and let me be clear, when I started my letter, I started out with saying I'm a strong proponent of due process protections, and Mr. Ralenkotter has not been charged or convicted of any crimes. So I'm not going there. But as the investigation continues, it is hard for people, I think, to believe that he didn't know at some level what the cards he was using for his personal flights. And whenever we're talking about corruption writ large, I think that the incoming candidates are going to recognize that that's not okay, and so that's not really the yardstick we're going to measure this by.
What have you heard from the board members? Anything in reaction to your letter?
I've heard nothing from any of them.
The LVCVA, obviously they claim a lot of success in bringing people to Las Vegas, but do we still need the LVCVA? I mean, can't casinos promote themselves in the city?
The LVCVA brings a perspective as they're actually not the market participants. They're not the people on the strip trying to sell their product. So they bring a more global approach to this, and so I think there's still a place for them. Should they, be spending the kinds of money? I mean, we're talking about a couple $100 million. Should they be spending that kind of money on themselves? No. But by the same token, I think they do a lot of good, and I support their organization.
I think one reason that you've seen so much with things like the gift card or the perks or the first class flights is the board structure is kind of unique. No one's elected directly to be on the LVCVA board. And that board was created by state lawmakers way back. Mm-hmm. Is there some change that needs to happen on the state level when it comes to LVCVA governance?
I don't think so. I think the history of their success speaks for itself.
I want to turn to your legislative race. You're running for the state senate. It looks like Democrats will have a majority, but if you win your race, they will not have the 2/3 they need to raise taxes. They've pushed for property tax increases, other tax increases. There could be a lot of pressure on you to raise taxes. Are there any taxes you would vote for?
I can't envision any at this point. I personally believe that there's plenty of money in state government at this point. Not that we couldn't use more, but I think that the footprint of government is big enough. I would like to scale back some on some of the things that we do and use that money more effectively. Ultimately, I think there's enough waste in the system that we could do a better job, and that's where I'm focusing. So, it's hard to say what might come up in the future, but I can't envision right now any tax that I would support. And if any tax was proposed, I think the appropriate way of dealing with that is go to the voters. Go to the people that are paying the tax and ask them if they're willing to do it. Because frankly, I'm getting a lot of comments at the door that they would rather see continuation of the commerce tax, and they might even pay more if it means that more money is going to education. Because our education system is in crisis. And part of that's money, I think most of that's leadership, but if the body politic decided we want to spend more on education and we're willing to pay more, they're the ones who get to decide. But right now, my constituents are saying no more taxes, and so I would agree.
You know, the Democrats are pushing a property tax change via a constitutional amendment that would basically reset a value upon sale. Is that something you would vote for because it would get sent to the voters?
No, because ultimately I think it's probably going to be unconstitutional. The Constitution requires a steady and equal basis, and when you start having somebody next door to someone who just sells and they're wildly different values, I think we've got a problem. But again, I don't think, and we saw this in the last session with the attempt to remove the secondary cap. It creates a disparate system. We need to come up with a better way of doing it maybe, but no, I think raising taxes itself under the existing structure isn't the answer.
I want to turn to a specific education reform that was passed in 2015. It was read by 3, basically holding kids back if they aren't reading at grade level at the end of the 3rd grade. The program passed in 2015, but they're not going to hold kids back until the end of 2020. There's going to be a push this year to repeal that bill or water it down. Where do you stand on read by 3?
I've heard that repeal legislation's coming. We haven't given it a chance. I mean, it was announced in 2015. They started to implement it shortly thereafter, but they had a point at which it was going to ultimately take effect in 2020 to give people an opportunity, first to understand it, second to implement it, and then third to make sure that we know what those kids are moving into. If we want to look at just one of the things I've heard most probably is, well, this stigmatizes the child. Well, that's a cultural issue, and ultimately, if a child is going to go through difficult times, I'd rather they do it when they're young and able to recover quickly than when they get into high school and they have no choice, they drop out. If we're talking about outcomes as the ultimate yardstick, I want to do whatever it takes to make those outcomes more likely to be successful.
So 8,000 to 10,000 kids get held back in CCSD. Parents are calling you. You're willing to say, look, this is the best thing for your child?
Well, every case is unique, and so we take them on a case-by-case basis. But if we're talking about 8,000 students out of, 250,000 students, that's a pretty small number. And my question, of course, then becomes, well, what other services does the child need so that they can be successful? Where are we, what's led them to be in this situation in the first place, and what can we do to improve their chances moving forward? And that's what Read by 3 is really all about.
I want to touch on guns. It's going to be an issue next session. Obviously, there was the tragic October 1st shooting. Are there any gun control measures that Nevada needs? We've got
probably all of the gun control measures that you can imagine already on the books, short of bans and confiscation. It's already illegal to have it if you're a felon. It's already illegal to have automatic weapons without a tax stamp from the federal government, and that requires a federal background check, more significant, more sophisticated than any other.
What about bump stocks?
Bump stocks are I heard the argument that, well, this allows the disabled to shoot weapons. I'm okay with eliminating. In fact, I think that the only bump stock manufacturer in America is now out of business. So I think that's probably pretty much a moot point. But I don't have a problem with restricting those. I think we should do it the same way as we do with automatic weapons, with a tax stamp, and allow people who can demonstrate a need to be able to obtain them.
All right, and we're going to have to leave it there. Assemblyman, thank you so much for coming on.
All right, thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching. Remember, if it involves Nevada politics, we're talking about it right here on Nevada Politics Today. I'll see you next week.